If you are unable to pass a forceps through the biopsy channel, or if when the endoscope is being leak tested with a pressure tester and you are experiencing an air leak from the biopsy channel, then it will be necessary to replace with the correct size the proper biopsy channel. Utilizing some tweezers and a small amount of alcohol, apply the alcohol to the end of the tweezers. Carefully slide the tweezers underneath the boot or cone on the insertion tube. Allow the alcohol to flow underneath the cone. This will allow you to unscrew cone from the body section. Slide the cone down to approximately 70 centimeters on the insertion tube. If the cone is too tight, use a pair of soft pliers to unscrew body section boot or cone. Once it is loosened, again pull cone down to approximately 70 centimeter mark. Unscrew the first body section and pull down to cone at the 70 centimeter mark. Use your body section control spanner wrench, or SPTLU. Unscrew the body control retaining screw counterclockwise. And loosen till it slides off and down. The tool slides over insertion tube onto body. Using a pair of dividers or good quality strong tweezers, unscrew the biopsy forceps retaining ring. Remove this ring and be sure to save it for reassembly. Using a pair of tweezers, remove the biopsy forceps lock key with tweezers. This L-shaped lock key you'll need to save for reassembly. Unscrew the biopsy forceps opening and turn clockwise or counterclockwise till it is at the 9 or 3 o'clock position. This will allow you to unlock the biopsy forceps port from the body control section. Pull this out and store with your other parts. Next step is to slide down body control section from the body using your hand and thumb over a forceps port. Carefully slide cover down. Be sure that retaining ring is unscrewed fully counterclockwise. When sliding down body cover, be careful as not to pinch any of the tubing or light guide or image bundles that are on the underside of the body control section. Slide down body cover to cones. We now have access to the internal body control section of this Olympus endoscope. Unscrew retaining ring which holds on insertion tube to body control section. Unscrew retaining ring once loosened and pull down to body covers on insertion tube. Using your Phillips screwdriver, remove stainless steel screws from body control section which hold on biopsy forceps body control plate. Also unscrew biopsy forceps retaining valve from body control section. Also unscrew CO2 or auxiliary water feed if endoscope is colonoscope. Once all screws have been removed, carefully save them to retain for reassembly. Slide down body control section to covers on insertion. We have now exposed the biopsy forceps port, biopsy channel, which connects to the biopsy forceps retainer. We will now need to remove the biopsy channel from the retainer. Be very careful not to crush or pinch any of the tubing, CCD wires, light guide, or image bundle which is present in the endoscope control section. Carefully unscrew the biopsy forceps channel retaining ferrule ring from the biopsy forceps retaining sleeve. If this sleeve is on too tight, it may be necessary to utilize a small pair of needle nose pliers. Loosen ring with needle nose pliers. Once ring is loose, slide down biopsy forceps port and also remove secondary retaining ferrule. Again, it may be necessary to utilize a pair of needle nose pliers to grip and pull down second ferrule. Remove both these ferrules from biopsy channel and retain for reassembly. Now that we have separated the biopsy channel from the biopsy channel sleeve, we will need to either turn the endoscope over or work on the other end of the endoscope, which is the distal end portion. Be careful when turning over endoscope not to kink or bend or break any of the wires, tubes, or image light bundles. We will now work on the distal end tip. We will need to remove the bending rubber from the bending section of the endoscope to replace the biopsy channel. into the first bending rubber glue joint at the tip and the bending section. Carefully cut down and make an into the bending rubber glue joint, being careful not to cut into the C-cover distal end assembly. Once you have cut an incision into the glue, you'll need to carefully peel back glue and binding thread underneath. Again, being very careful not to cut into or break the C-cover or distal end assembly hood on tip. We have now broke away bending rubber sheath or distal end C-cover tip. We will now need to cut lower glue joint from insertion tube to bending section. Utilizing ordinary Scotch tape, cut off a piece approximately 4 to 5 inches in length. We'll use this to protect the insertion tube from cuts or nicks from our X-Acto knife. Take the Scotch tape and wrap it at the base of the second glue joint and wrap it fully around the insertion tube once or twice. Curl the tape over so you can easily remove it. We will now cut an incision in the bending rubber sheath, approximately halfway in the middle of your glue joint. Once you have cut a groove, take your X-Acto knife and cut a diagonal cut from the middle towards the bending section, being careful not to cut into our bending section of the endoscope. Make one more incision along the leading edge of our glue joint binding. Carefully peel up glue joint with X-Acto knife. We have now separated our bending rubber sheath from our insertion tube by a half of our glue joint. Using a pair of surgical scissors, carefully slide the dull side of your surgical scissors into the bending rubber sheath and carefully cut off your bending rubber sheath, being extremely careful not to catch any of the mesh which is underneath the bending rubber sheath. Cut off bending rubber entirely. We have now exposed the bending mesh and bending section of this Olympus endoscope. We will now need to separate the distal end from the bending section. Locate the two flathead set screws which hold the distal end assembly to the bending section. Unscrew both countersunk screws be sure to retain for reassembly. Once the two retaining screws have been removed, you'll now carefully need to slide out the distal end assembly from the bending section, being very wary that the CCD chip or image bundle, the light guides and channels are all tight and placed underneath this bending section mesh. Do not force the distal end out for any reason. Again, being very careful not to pinch any of the tubes, the wires, or the channels. If you are unsure of the orientation from the distal end to the bending section, a good way to remember when reassembling the endoscope is to use a marker to mark the distal end to the bending section for easy reassembly. You will now need to locate the biopsy channel itself so we can remove it to replace it with it. The distal end, the biopsy channel in question, will be the only opening, large opening in the distal end. You'll follow that to the biopsy channel, which is usually coiled, silver coiled at the biopsy channel itself. Again, be very careful to make sure you distinguish the biopsy channel from the other tubes, CCD, or image bundle, as we can cause severe damage if we cut into the wrong tube or channel. Again, locate the biopsy channel from the distal end, opening, follow that down to verify that is the biopsy channel. Use a very sharp X-Acto knife. We'll need to cut into the top of the biopsy channel to remove previous bindings and glue. Be extremely careful not to cut into either light guides or any other channels such as the air water, image bundle, or CCD chip. You can cut a groove into the top of the biopsy channel. Obtaining a good quality dental pick, dentist tool. Use a dentist tool that has a good sharp bent tip in this fashion. We use this dentist pick to remove the glue from around the biopsy channel. It will be necessary to slide pick down and around the biopsy channel forceps pipe to remove the old damaged biopsy channel. Again, being very careful not to dig into the light guide bundles, channels, or CCD chip or image bundle, depending on endoscope. Carefully remove glue from around biopsy channel. Once you have scraped most of the glue from around the opening of the biopsy channel, very gently slide in a piece of emery cloth underneath the biopsy forceps channel. Carefully slide it underneath without damaging light guide bundles, image bundle, or any of the channels. Push and pull it very carefully from underneath the underside of the damaged biopsy channel This will allow us to get a good firm grip on the channel to be able to pull it off the forceps biopsy channel tube. I've now carefully removed the biopsy channel from the biopsy channel port tube, which is attached to the distal end assembly. Remove your emery cloth. Very carefully slide the biopsy channel in very slowly so we can cut away and clean the rest of the glue from around this tube, which will need to be perfectly clean to allow application of new biopsy forceps channel. Again, using your dental pick, clean all the remaining glue from around the forceps tube. Be careful not to puncture the light guide bundles, CCD chip, or image guide bundle. That will be any of the parts that you see here surrounding the biopsy channel tube. Use your pick, clean out all the glue, and clean off with some towel and alcohol. There should be no glue remaining on this tube, either in front or behind it. Double check, again clean with a small piece of paper towel and some alcohol. We will now need to replace the old damaged biopsy forceps channel with a brand new replacement Olympus biopsy forceps channel tube, which meets exact specifications of this endoscope. You can refer to the information provided with this videotape or an Olympus owner's manual, which specifies the correct channel size for each endoscope. In this case, GIF 130, which has a 2.8 millimeter biopsy channel. Again, check the specifications for each scope that you are working on to be sure that you purchase the correct size biopsy forceps channel tube. You will now need a length of plastic tubing that you can pass down through the biopsy forceps channel tube in order to pull through our new biopsy forceps channel. Be sure that the tubing is longer than the length of the biopsy forceps channel. It would need to be double the length to pull the brand new biopsy forceps channel. Pass your tubing down through the damaged biopsy channel until it comes out the other end in the body control section. Watch the body control section and be sure the tubing passes through the biopsy channel. Once it has passed through to the body, pull out at least same length of new biopsy channel. Once you have fed your biopsy forceps guide tubing through the channel, in this case we have used piece of tubing approximately 2 millimeters, which fed through the biopsy channel. So we were able to attach our brand new 2.8 millimeter biopsy forceps channel. In some cases, Olympus will mark on the forceps tube the correct biopsy channel size, which in this case is a 2.8. But again, refer to literature provided by Olympus or which came with this videotape. We'll need to feed our brand new biopsy forceps channel onto our forceps channel guide tubing, slide it up and over to meet the old biopsy forceps channel. Once the new biopsy forceps channel meets the old damaged tube, you will need to grab the other end of your brand new biopsy forceps channel tube, and you'll need to pinch the end of the channel with your guide tubing. Go to the other end of your endoscope, which should be laid out flatly on your working area bench. You will then pull the guide tube and the biopsy channel at the same time, pulling the old channel out from inside the insertion tube. You will be performing this while you hold the guide tube on the other end of the brand new biopsy forceps channel tube. This will allow you to pull in the brand new channel through the insertion tube of the endoscope. If you're working on an endoscope such as a colonoscope, you may need to get somebody to help you to hold this side of the biopsy forceps tube while pinching the guide tube inside while you pull from the distal end, because it will be too long for you to reach to be able to pull from one end and hold it on the other end. Continue pulling on old biopsy channel and your guide wire tube at the same time, and continue to pull all the way out until your brand new biopsy forceps channel is pulled through to the distal tip. Once the new biopsy forceps channel has pulled through the entire length of the insertion tube and the bedding section, pull the brand new tube until it meets the distal tip of your endoscope. You can now release the other end of your brand new biopsy forceps channel and pull through your plastic tube guide. Now we will prepare to adhere our brand new forceps channel tube onto our distal end assembly pipe. To prepare your biopsy channel for installation and gluing onto the distal tip, you'll need to clean any graphite powder that got on the biopsy channel when it was pulled through the insertion tube. Make sure that the biopsy channel is clean on the externally and internally. Using your biopsy channel wire, you'll need to make 2 to 3 loops which will go around the biopsy forceps channel in order to tie it off at the biopsy forceps pipe. Make 1 loop and then loop it around for 2 loops. Pass one end through the 2 loops 3 times. We will pass this over the biopsy channel in order to tie it off at the biopsy pipe. Make 2 more of these loops for a total of 3. Taking your 3 biopsy wire loops, pull them over biopsy forceps channel and tighten loosely over a channel. Do that for all 2 to 3 loops. On smaller endoscopes with smaller biopsy channels, 1 to 2 loops would be sufficient. Take your emery cloth and slide it over your biopsy channel. While you are doing this, be sure not to kink any of the wires or cause any damage to the CCD chip or image bundle. In a mixing dish, measure out your 2-part epoxy according to manufacturer's specifications and thoroughly mix 2-part epoxy. We will use this to glue our new biopsy forceps channel onto the distal end assembly pipe. According to which epoxy you use, it may be good to let the epoxy set for at least a half an hour to an hour until it starts to get tacky. That way it will not run into the distal end assembly and adhere to other important tubes and wires and or CCD chip or image bundle assembly. We just want the glue to adhere the channel to the tip without running into the distal end. Once your glue has set up, you'll need to take a pair of dull tweezers and holding your new biopsy forceps with your emery cloth, you'll need to bell out the channel, which means opening the PTFE tubing to allow for insertion over the biopsy forceps tube. Do not bell this out over a millimeter, otherwise it will not be able to grip onto the tube properly. Slide back the biopsy forceps channel tube into the insertion tube carefully so we can gain access to the biopsy forceps tube. Using your slightly tacky 2-part epoxy, apply a small amount around the biopsy forceps tube. This means a bead approximately 1 millimeter from the end of the tube, and apply it all the way around the diameter of the forceps tube. Be sure it flows in and around the back of the forceps tube so our new biopsy channel will adhere properly to the tube itself. Holding the distal end and the biopsy forceps in your emery cloth, As long as the pipe has been belled out properly with your dull tweezers, you can slide the tube up and onto your forceps pipe. Using the proper size drill bit, slide this into the distal end. This will allow us to guide the biopsy channel onto our distal end forceps pipe. Pull the channel up and completely up to the end of the pipe right against the distal end. Once the biopsy forceps is up and close to the distal end and on to the coil pipe, we can now remove our emery cloth carefully from the biopsy forceps channel. Be careful not to damage the light bundles. We now need to slide up our biopsy channel binding wires and slide them up as far as they go, up and over the channel and the pipe. Do this for all three bindings. If necessary, you can utilize a toothpick to slide up the binding from underneath the forceps channel tube. Once all three binding wires are up and over the coil pipe and the biopsy channel, we will need to make an additional knot on each binding pull fairly tight and pull knot around towards either the light guide or the image bundle, being careful not to cut into them. This will allow for the bending section to clear our binding when we pull back the bending section to the distal end. Perform this for all three knots. Once all three bindings have been tied off and carefully pulled around, we can now cut off the excess wire, and we will cut it as close as possible to the biopsy forceps channel with a pair of sharp surgical scissors. Perform this for all three bindings. We can remove our guide drill bit. Take a piece of ordinary Scotch tape, approximately 4 to 5 inches in length, and double it over so there's no sticky side. We need to feed the Scotch tape underneath the biopsy forceps channel until it comes out the other side. If need be, take a pair of dull tweezers and pull your tape from underneath the biopsy forceps channel without damage to the light guide's chip or image bundle. Pull the tape as far as possible. This will prevent the glue from leaking and leaching down into CCD chip, image bundle, or light guide bundles. This will cause great difficulty in the future repairs due to the fact that the glue has stuck to the other internal parts of the endoscope. taking a bead of glue, apply the final glue around the top, bottom, and sides of the new biopsy forceps channel tube, and also cover over your 3 bindings. Let the glue set further. Be sure not to apply glue too much. You will need to be flush with the biopsy forceps channel in order to allow the bending section to pull up and over onto the distal end assembly. Once the glue has been applied, you can slide out and remove your tape from underneath the biopsy forceps channel tube. The channel now must be able to dry for at least 12 to 24 hours in order to be sure that the glue has dried and adhered to the biopsy forceps channel according to manufacturer specifications. Turn the endoscope while drying 180 degrees to allow the glue just to adhere to the biopsy channel. Again, let the glue dry at least overnight before further work is done on this endoscope. Being certain that our glue has dried and adhered properly to our new biopsy forceps channel, we can now reassemble our distal end assembly to bending section. Carefully align either of the screw holes from the bending section to the distal end or the marking that we had made previously with this assembly. Very carefully push back in our distal end assembly into the bending section. Do not force in any way the distal end into the bending section. Be sure that it is lined up correctly with either the markings or the screw holes. If this is pushed in with the wrong settings as far as the orientation of the channels and light guides or image bundle to the distal end and bending section, it will cause serious damage to any of the components internal. Again, line up and carefully push in distal end into our bending section. Once our distal end is back and joined in the bending section and orientated properly, we can now replace the 2 screws which we previously removed from our bending section. If need be, you can utilize tweezers to retain your 2 screws and reapply them into each hole. Tighten down both screws with a number 1 or number 2 screwdriver. Be sure you tighten them down and the screw heads are flush with the bending section. Once 2 screws have been applied to our bending section and is tight, we can now turn over the endoscope to work on our body section. We will now attach our biopsy forceps channel to our biopsy tube assembly. We need to prepare our channel and orientate it properly so that it attaches on to the assembly with the correct position and measurement. We need to orientate our insertion tube so that we are sure that the insertion tube is facing up and matching our body in the up position. We can do this by turning our up-down knob on our body control section. While we turn it up, we will observe the end of the endoscope, being sure that the distal end is being moved up in the up position. As long as the scope is being laid out flat on your working surface while you turn knob up, be sure that it is orientated up and the body section where your air-water valves are located, it is orientated in that up position. While turning the knobs, you can turn your insertion tube to be sure that while you're holding the endoscope in its up position, up meaning that the valves are facing the top, turn your insertion tube while watching the end of the scope so that it is in the up position. This is very critical, of course. If for any reason the insertion tube is twisted, it will cause the biopsy channel to twist upon reassembly to our body control section. Again, be certain while you're turning the up-down knob, turning it up will cause the distal end to turn up, and this means that it is aligned straight with the body while it is bending in the up position. You can also check to make sure that the knobs turn down and left and right, so we are certain that the endoscope insertion tube is straight. We will need to cut and measure our biopsy channel to the correct length. This will allow for the proper length of tubing to allow for the body covers and the insertion tube assembly to fit back on to the body section of the instrument. Using a stainless steel ruler with millimeter markings, we need to make a cut for this particular scope, which is a GIF 100, GIF 130. It will be 26 centimeters cut on the biopsy channel. We'll need to mark the biopsy channel at the 26 millimeter mark. And that's where we will cut off our excess biopsy channel. Using a very extremely sharp knife blade, cut at the 26 millimeter mark we had just put on. Once the correct measurement has been cut of the biopsy channel, retrieve your two ferrules. First, your outer ferrule. Slide on ferrule to biopsy channel. Slide on the wider part of ferrule onto biopsy channel first. Retrieve second ferrule and slide the wider end of ferrule on first. Retrieve your emery cloth and slide over biopsy channel tube and hold with a slight firm grip. Retrieve your dulled tweezers and carefully bell out the forceps channel tube without puncturing with the tip of tweezers. Once the channel is belled out, you'll need to slide channel up and over biopsy forceps assembly. Be sure biopsy channel is flush up against the forceps channel tube. Retrieve your permanent marker make a mark on biopsy channel facing you. As long as we had set our insertion tube and made sure it is in the up position, whereas the top of the insertion tube matches the top of the body section, we can now screw on our ferrule. We'll need to apply small amounts of black RTV in order to make an airtight seal. Apply black RTV around biopsy channel at the junction of ferrule placement to the forceps channel assembly. Carefully screw on ferrules using a pair of needle nose pliers to tighten on clockwise. While tightening, be sure to watch the mark you had made with your permanent marker, so to watch the channel does not twist or turn while you are tightening the channel onto the assembly. If the channel twists either clockwise or counterclockwise, you will need to take ferrule back off again, reapply, and retighten. If the channel kinks in any direction, it will cause complications when passing biopsy forceps through insertion tube, which can cause to damage the biopsy channel. Be sure this ferrule is on tight, because if it becomes loose during procedure or sterilization, it will flood the entire instrument. We can now pull back up our body control section assemblies. We need to carefully pull up and push under the forceps assembly. Be careful not to pinch any of the wires, image bundles, light guide bundles, or wires. Carefully slide body cover up and over. Match up screw holes to body section. Again, be sure that none of the wires are kinked or caught underneath any of the body plates when pulling this cover back on. Otherwise, severe damage can occur to the light guides, image bundle, or any tubing. From your cones, pull up your insertion tube locking ring, which locks the insertion tube onto the body control section, and apply this locking ring finger tight. Retrieve all your Phillips screws that you had previously removed, and with your jeweler's screwdriver, reapply all Phillips screws removed. Again, being sure that you do not cut or pinch any of the cables or tubes in the body section when tightening the Phillips screws in. Also, screw in your biopsy forceps assembly into the body section by maneuvering assembly so screw holes match to allow you to screw in forceps assembly to body. Again, being sure you do not kink any of the cables or wires. Once all screws have been replaced, we will now make sure that our insertion tube is lined up properly to the top of our flexible endoscope. You'll need to make sure, again, that this insertion tube is in the up position. And of course there are two ways you can do that. First is by angulating the endoscope up and being sure while watching the distal end of the scope that it is going up in the up position towards you and the body of the instrument. While watching the distal end at the end of the working area, you'll be turning the knob in the up position and watching the distal end and being sure that it is straight and aligned with the body. That way the insertion tube and image will be in the up position. If the insertion tube in any way is turned improperly, it will cause both the angulation and the image to be in the wrong positions. So it is very critical that is paid attention while tightening your insertion tube onto the body control section. If you are still unsure of the orientation, you can always look through the instrument if it is a fibroscope, looking down at your working area and placing an object in front of the bending section. Either looking through the fibroscope or plugging the instrument into the video processor, you can be certain that you're in the up position by placing an object the right side up in front of the distal end and looking on your monitor or through your fibroscope to be sure that when the scope is in up position with the up